Hello Stratters, it's CreepEvee back again with another video. We're doing something a little bit different this week, and we are looking at the new set, Hour of Devastation. The set officially comes out next week, but I'm sure some of you have been to the pre-release. I did last night. That is why I'm incredibly tired. I wanted to make this video before I went, but I decided that I wanted to get a little hands-on experience with the cards before I made this video. But since the set is coming out, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some of the commons in this set and see how we might be able to use them whenever we officially get them and see what we can do in Pauper. So, a little bit different video, but I think it might be interesting. We'll be back to doing our regularly scheduled videos next week. We'll probably see what we can do with some of the new cards for Pauper, as well as looking how this set may affect other formats and what else we might be able to do with them. But let's get on to the new cards. I have cards for all 5 colors pulled up. So let's start with blue. And we'll start with the card that I think is probably the best card for Pauper that has come out of this set. Spellweaver Eternal. Okay, so it has Prowess and Afflict 2. So we'll go ahead and just talk over Afflict 2. If you guys don't know, it's the new mechanic, or one of the new mechanics. Essentially, if you block this creature, then you're going to take however much damage the number of Afflict is. So if you block this creature with Afflict 2, it's going to deal 2 to you. But it doesn't actually deal damage. That's how much you lose. So the creature isn't dealing damage, so you can't abuse that with something like Infect, which is good, because that would get kind of nasty with some of these creatures that have Afflict 3 and whatnot. But looking at that, so we have Afflict 2 with her, and I think that that's probably one of the strongest parts of this card. It is a 2-drop. So this is definitely a card that you could abuse in a Prowess deck, which I think is probably the best thing that you can do with this set as far as Pauper, because you have several Prowess creatures, and a lot of them are pretty solid. So for a 2-drop 2/1 with Prowess, not bad at all. I like this card a lot. I think this is going to show up in a lot of Pauper decks. Look for it. It's something that you could probably get excited if you pull it. I think this is also really good and limited, so if you pull it at pre-release, you might want to try it out. The video is a little bit late for pre-release, but if you guys are going Sunday or maybe even Saturday night, depending on when this gets up, can maybe get a couple ideas here. I think this is a very solid card, and look to see it in the Pauper format very soon. On to a card that is a little, maybe not quite as good, but I think this is still a solid card. Tragic Lesson. It's a 3-drop blue instant. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card unless you return a land you control to its owner's hand. So it's a little bit like Thirst for Knowledge. Thirst for Knowledge, you draw 2 and discard 2 unless you, well, you draw 3, discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. So kind of a similar effect. The reason why I really like this in Pauper is Pauper is a format that already has a lot of draw spells, but one of the things that I think is really interesting about this card specifically is the returning land mechanic. Pauper is a format with a lot of enter the battlefield trigger effects, so we have several lands that gain us life whenever we put them onto the battlefield. You have cards like Mortuary Mire, so I think that this card has potential if you're playing a lot of lands like that. So something to consider. Like I said, not the best card in the world because it's not going to work for every deck, but if you are playing lands like that, I could see it being a fun little way to maybe gain a little bit more life than you would before. The art is pretty brutal. I really like the art, but geez, looks like Kefnet did not go out in a fun way. If you're not aware, the gods do die in this set, and from what I have heard, apparently in the story, it's pretty rough the way they die. But anyway, moving on. Unquenchable Thirst. This is a really good card in Limited. Once again, if you're going to a pre-release or just drafting next week or something, it's an enchant aura, and essentially the card is not going to untap during its controller's untap step. But if you control a desert, you're going to tap that creature then. So this card is really good even if you're not playing a desert, just preventing them from untapping, which is why I think it's solid and limited, because you really don't even need a desert. But if you do, it can really slow your opponent down. So I think that it is a pretty solid card for a 2-drop. And honestly, I think that the deserts have potential in Pauper, seeing as you can cycle them, things like that. We do have cycle lands already, but these might be something to look for. There are a couple cards in Pauper that would interact with the deserts, so probably something that you could do with them. So just a card to think about. Next we have Aerial Guide, another really good card in Limited, and I think has potential in Pauper. It's a flying Drake. It's a 2/2 as a 3-drop. Whenever it attacks, you can target another attacking creature and it gains flying until end of turn. So a very simple card that you can use to get one of your high damage creatures over some blockers. So if you are playing a deck that wants to pump up one creature like a Prowess deck, so let's say you have your Spellweaver, you cast a bunch of spells, Spellweaver gets really strong, attack with Aerial Guide, get it over any blockers. The only problem is that Pauper is a format that has a lot of flying blockers in it, so it's something to consider, but in the right matchup, I could see this being a really strong card. And the last one for blue is Countervailing Winds. Okay, so counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each card in your graveyard. So it is a 3-drop counter spell, which is not great, but the fact that you're paying 1 for each card in your graveyard is a very strong effect. You know, it could be better to just outright counter it, obviously, but I think that this definitely has potential to completely shut your opponent out from being able to pay that mana unless they're playing something like Tron, and even in that case they might not want to pay for it. So it's a card to consider, but obviously there are counter spells that you could use to just straight out counter it for the same drop price. But the reason why I like this card is because it has cycling. I'm a big fan of cards with cycling, especially in Pauper. I think a counter spell with cycling is really good, and I think that this one has potential. You have cards like Censor that cause them to have to pay 1 that has cycling, and it's a 2-drop. This has a more expensive cycling cost, but it definitely is going to cause your opponent to have to pay more mana unless you're drawing this on, you know, your first few turns. But it is a 3-drop, so I think that you're definitely going to have cards in your graveyard. So something to consider. It's not gonna, I mean, it's not the best counter spell in the world, but like I said, the main reason why I'm interested in it is for the cycling cost. So something to consider. So that's everything for blue. So let's move on. Let's go to green next. We'll start with Life Goes On. Life Goes On is a very simple pump spell. No, this isn't the pump spell. I apologize. This is the life gain spell. So you gain 4 life unless a creature's died this turn. You gain 8 life instead. I think that this could be a really solid card in something like Torax. So you have a lot of creatures that want to go to discard. Something like your Spore Frog, I believe, is the one that you sack. So you sacrifice your Spore Frog, prevent damage. You pay 1, cast this, gain 8 life. I think this could be really solid in a deck like that, and probably in a few other decks. If nothing else, you're gaining 4 life, which is quite a lot in Pauper. So I really like this card, especially due to it being a 1-drop and an instant. So I think that this is something that can really work out pretty well, depending on the deck, but I think it's pretty solid overall. On to Ronas' Stalwart. Pretty simple creature. 2-drop is a 2/2, so it's a bear, but it has that you can exert it whenever you attack. it gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So Exert is kind of iffy in Pauper, but the reason that I think this one works out well is because it keeps power 2 or less from blocking. Pauper is a format that has a lot of creatures with 2 or less, so if you're playing against a deck that's creating a lot of tokens, like maybe a Kuldotha Boros deck, their creatures just don't have the power necessary to actually block this card when you exert it. So I think that that can be pretty good. If you're attacking normally, it's a pretty solid 2/2 bear. So definitely a card to look out for. I really like this card. I'm going to try to use it in some of my decks. So something to look out for. If you're not familiar with Exert, essentially what Exert is came out in the last set. Whenever you're attacking, you can choose to exert it, and that card just won't untap during your next untap step. So it slows you down, but I think it definitely has a place in Pauper. So look out for this card. I think it's going to be something worth using, and it's insanely good in limited again. So I don't want to harp on limited, but it is definitely solid there. On to Ambuscade. So this is essentially a fight card. You're going to get +1/+0 before you fight, but it isn't exactly fight. You're dealing damage and they won't. So if you go back to something like the Death Touch deck that we played last week, this has a lot of synergy with it, but even outside of that, I think that there's definitely a few decks that can use this. If you're playing a deck with a lot of big creatures, which green oftentimes does, or if you're pumping them up, this can be a good way to just remove some of your opponent's problem creatures. If nothing else, you're dealing the damage and they're not. So let's say you attack with a creature. They declare blockers. So you cast this spell. So let's say you're attacking and an Ulamog's Crusher is going to block your creature. And let's say your creature is a 3/3. So your creature attacks. They declare blockers with the Crusher. You play this, they get +1/+1, so they're now a 4-power creature. So this resolves, they're going to deal damage, so the Crusher takes 4 damage. Blocking resolves, it takes another 4 damage, and you've killed a Crusher with a 3-power creature. So it has a lot of potential, I think, to just do a few fun things to get rid of heavy blockers, and definitely a good way to kill off smaller creatures very quickly. So look out for this card. I think it has potential. I don't know whether it's going to be played in every green deck, but I think it's something to consider if you have a spot open. Next, over to Gift of Strength. This is the pump spell. So it's a 2-drop green spell. Target creature gets +3/+3 and gains reach until end of turn. I like this card for several reasons. One, if nothing else, it's giving your creatures reach, and as we talked about earlier, Pauper is a format that has a lot of flyers in it. And the +3/+3, obviously very good. There's a lot of green decks that can capitalize on this. If you're playing something that, like Hexproof Boggles, this card is fantastic. If you're playing just anything else, like an Infect deck, obviously this has a lot of synergy. So definitely a card to look out for, because it kind of has 2 ways to work. It is an instant, so obviously you can use it to get reach and block something like a Core Skyfisher. Go ahead and get that guy out of the way. So definitely a card to consider, because it has kind of 2 applications, and it's only a 2-drop, so I think it's definitely worth checking out. For our last green spell, we have Beneath the Sands. Very simple card. It's a 3-drop. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. So a little bit of land acceleration, a little bit of mana ramp for Pauper, which I think it's a format that could use some more of that. So this is a good card to capitalize on it. And it has cycling 2. As I said before, I think cycling is a very strong mechanic, especially in Pauper. So I really like this card. I think I'm going to throw it into some of my high cost green cards, green decks rather. Um, so just to accelerate the mana, and also it's there for the cycling. I think it's good maybe as something like a 2 of. So something to consider. I really like this card, especially like I said, due to cycling. I think cycling is just a good mechanic in Pauper. On to our red spells. So we have Kenra Scrapper. I can attest to this card being strong because it did a lot of damage to me in Limited last night. So it has Menace, which is always good, and you can exert it, and it'll get +2/+2. That making it a 4/3 whenever it's exerted. They need 2 creatures to block it due to it having Menace, and even if you're attacking normally, it is a 2/3, which is still very strong even for a 3-drop. So if you're playing a red aggressive deck, I think this is worth considering. The fact that it has Menace is really strong, and even if you're playing against like a token deck that is able to block it, it being 3 toughness is going to make it very difficult for them to actually kill it with tokens. If you can get this out fairly early in the game, obviously it's usually going to be on your 3rd turn, but still fairly early in Pauper. If you can get this out, I think you can start dishing out a lot of damage very quickly. So look out for this card. I think it could be very dangerous. It definitely did a lot of damage to me in Limited, so look out for it. Kindled Fury, very simple pump spell. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains 1st strike until end of turn. It's a 1-drop, so very easy to cast. I think that this is fantastic in prowess decks, as I mentioned before. This card's been printed before, obviously. It has several prints, but I just wanted to bring it up again because it did get reprinted, and I don't see this card a lot. I think it's really good. I don't want to harp on reprints too much, but I did want to bring this one up, especially because its new art is absolutely fantastic. I love this art, so I'm going to try to use it just because of the new art, but I also think this is a solid card that doesn't see play enough, and because I think that prowess decks have more potential because of this set, I think that it becomes more viable. So a couple reasons why I wanted to bring it up, but obviously it has been reprinted before, so you guys should know what it does already. Thorn Moloch, it's a 3-drop, and it is a big lizard that has prowess. It's a 2/2 already, and it has 1st strike as long as it's attacking. So 1st strike, obviously very strong. Prowess, very strong. It's already a 2/2, and it's a 3-drop. I think that this card is incredibly solid. It's incredibly good in Limited. I used it in my deck. I think it's just a very solid card. Definitely something to consider in a red aggro deck, and obviously in a prowess deck. Over to Firebrand Archer. It's essentially a what is it? It's the Goblin. I can't think of his name. But whenever you cast a non-creature spell, deals 1 damage to your opponent. 1 damage doesn't seem like a lot, but it can add up very quickly. Again, if you're doing something like a prowess deck, this could be very solid. Used it in my Limited deck, and it can build up damage very quickly, especially in a long drag out game, which Pauper can sometimes lead into. You cast enough spells and this thing could get a lot of value, and it is a 2/1, so attacking with it isn't too bad as long as your opponent can't block it. So look out for this card. I really like it. I'm going to try to incorporate it into some of my decks. So be on the lookout for it. Maybe pick it up if you can, if you're interested in playing something like a prowess deck. On to black. I only have 2 cards listed here. Black is very strong in this set, but not really in the common side of it, in my opinion. So we're just going to start with Without Weakness. So target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, and it has cycling too. So again, cycling I just think is a very strong mechanic, and also giving your creature indestructible is never a bad thing. And it is a 2-drop, so I don't really know about maining this card, but if you're playing a black deck and you're afraid of a lot of removal, you can side this in, which is a pretty good type of side card because it does have the cycling. So I really like this just against removal, so more of a side deck option, but I think it's a solid card overall. And then we have Kenra Eternal. So it's a pretty simple card. It's essentially just a bear. It's 2-drop 2/2. And it has Afflict 1, which isn't a whole lot of damage, but it's damage nonetheless. And it is a 2-drop for 2. So pretty solid, I think, in Pauper if you just need another black creature to throw in a black deck. Afflict, I just think, is a really strong mechanic in this format. So not the strongest card in the world, but I think it does have potential, and I think it's a card to consider if you have a couple spots open in a black deck. Maybe throw 2 of these in, give it a try. I think it might work out pretty well for you. And lastly, on to our white spells. White is also very strong in this set. Pretty good for Pauper. I have 4 cards pulled up for you guys. So let's go over the first one. Dejeru's. I'm just going to go with Dejeru. Dejeru's Renucation. This card just is really trying to give me Renew Citation. I think that's what it is. This set is very hard for me to pronounce cards in. But it's a 2-drop, tap 2 target creatures, and it has cycling for 1 white. So I know that I sound like a broken record, but I think cycling is just a very good mechanic in Pauper. And tapping 2 creatures I don't think is ever bad. I think it's a good way to try to close out the game if you need to get past opponent's blockers. I think it's a solid card all around, and I think that it definitely has a place in white decks that are a little bit more on the aggressive end. If you're playing something like Kadoltha Boros and you've got all of your tokens out and you're ready to try to close out the game and they only have a few creatures, tap them down with this really quick and swing in for game. I really like this card. I'm going to try to incorporate it. I'm building Kadoltha Boros right now, and I think I'm definitely going to throw this in. If nothing else, in a side deck, if you know that if your opponent isn't playing a deck that has a ton of creatures and just a couple of big creatures, this could be really strong. But I think main decking is fine. But it is a card that you might side out against, like a token deck where it's not going to get as much value. But overall, I think it's a very strong card for this format. Act of Heroism. It's an instant. You untap target creature. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn and can block an additional creature this turn. So it's a pretty simple card. Not very offensive, but it is a good defensive card. Just being able to block unexpectedly is pretty solid if your opponent isn't used to seeing this card. Being able to block an additional creature this turn I also think is very strong. So token decks might be losing 2 tokens instead of 1, but honestly if your creature is tapped, they won't be expecting to lose them at all. And even just against kind of smaller damage creatures where your creature can afford to block 2 of them, but you are getting that +2/+2, so it is going to make your creature a lot harder to kill. And even if you're fine with your creature dying, if you're in a desperate situation, overall I just think that it has several different uses. I very much like surprise block cards, so you can swing out, let your opponent feel like they're safe, and attack with some of their bigger creatures or creatures that they don't want to lose, drop Act of Heroism, and try to stop that and shut that down. Very solid. I'm going to try to include it in some of my white decks. So look out for it. If it starts getting played, you might want to try to keep that card in mind. Make sure they don't have the mana open for it whenever you go to attack. So if nothing else, if you don't want to play this card, just think about it in the future. If people start playing it, you might want to be prepared for it and play around it accordingly. So God Pharaoh's Faithful. This card was amazing in decks last night at the pre-release. It is a 1-drop human wizard that is a 0/4 Whenever you cast a blue, black, or red spell, you gain 1 life. So blue, black, or red, essentially Grixis is kind of a weird combination with white, but there's definitely a lot of decks that this has synergy with, and overall a 1-drop 4 toughness blocker is never a bad thing, and a little bit of life gain, never a bad card at all. Not sure exactly what decks, like even a Kadoltha Boros deck might be able to work well with this, because you do have a lot of red spells. If you're trying to do like a white-blue deck, this could be pretty strong. If you're doing an Orzhov build of like Orzhov tokens or Orzhov life gain, this has a lot of synergy, obviously. Just keep this card in mind. I think it's really solid in any deck that is playing white with one of these other Grixis colors. Just because you can gain a little bit of life, and if nothing else, it's 1-drop 4 toughness blocker. And our last card, Sandblast. I just wanted to bring this card up. Obviously, it's been printed overall, but it deals 5 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. I just don't see this card played enough, I don't think. There are other alternatives to it, but I just wanted to bring it up because it is getting the reprint, and I think that it's a card that could see more play. Also, it being just printed, people might be more apt to try it out, so another card that you might want to be wary of whenever you go and play. You might have newer players that are getting into Pauper that haven't seen this card before. It was printed back in Fate Reforged, so just something to consider whenever you're trying to attack and you're playing against white. You might think that you're safe, and bam, Sandblast. So obviously, like I said, it has been printed before, but just wanted to bring it up. Don't see it played quite enough, and because of the newer players maybe coming in, you might want to think about this card seeing play. And also, this art is just absolutely fantastic. A lot of the cards that got reprinted that got new art in this set, it's just absolutely beautiful. Let's just look at the version in Fate Reforged. It's nice, but it just compared to this awesome art here, the art in this set is just fantastic. But anyway, we're not really here to talk about art, we're talking about cards playability. Just wanted to bring this card up like I did with what was it, one of the red spells. But like I said, don't want to spend too much time on cards that I've already talked about. As far as land cards, I didn't really see anything that I wanted to bring up. Except the deserts are pretty good. It's just we already have cycle lands, so they don't really have an application to a Pauper player outside of if you're playing cards that interact with deserts. We saw a couple cards for Pauper that interact with deserts, but I don't think quite enough to really value them extremely highly. I've heard some people trying to figure out ways to abuse deserts in Pauper. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with my barren moors and remote islands for cycle lands. But if you can figure out a way to use the deserts, they are pretty cool. Definitely have really interesting art. So these are the cards that I'm most interested in this set. Like I said, I wanted to make this video earlier, but I decided to go play in the pre-release and get a little bit more experience with the cards before I made the video. So this video will be coming out a little bit late this week. I hope you guys understand. Next week I am going to be back playing decks like I normally do. I think that we are going to try to do some things specifically with the cards that got printed in Amonkhet. Just kind of celebrate it, because next week it will be officially coming out. So I don't know when it will be on Moto. So if it's available on Moto, I'll try to build a deck with it, with the cards in this set. If not, we'll do something else. I know that in the last video in the comments, someone asked for slivers. Sorry we didn't get to it this week, but it is a deck that I want to play. So maybe next week, if not the week after. I promise we will get to it. If you have any other suggestions for decks, please let me know down below. As always, this has been CreepEvee. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and a comment. Let me know what you guys want to see next, and let me know what cards you're excited for in this set. Interesting to see what you guys are thinking. I think it's a great set for Pauper. So if you're interested, definitely, if you still have time, should have at least Sunday, if you're watching this video, to go out and play in the pre-release. I had a ton of fun. Like I said, hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to see my videos as well as the rest of the team here at Magic Gathering Strat. This has been CreepEvee signing out, and I'll see you next week.